Hello and welcome to In Conversation. Today I'm in conversation with Julia Penny. Julia is the immediate past president of ICAEW, having been a non-executive ICAEW board member since 2017 and chair of the board during her year as president. Julia is also a member of ICAEW Council and a past chair of both the ICAEW Technical Advisory and Ethics Advisory Committees, a former member of the Technical Strategy and Financial Reporting Faculty Boards, and of the AAT's Council and Audit Committees. Julia is passionate about audit quality and a well-functioning profession. This includes a sharp focus on improving diversity, developing the use of technology, and constantly reflecting on the need for businesses to become sustainable and how the profession can help achieve that. Hello, Julia.
Hello, Alan. It's lovely to be here.
You're very, very welcome to today. It's great to have you. It's been a few months now since you stepped down as president of ICAEW. It must be a whirlwind year when you're doing the job, but it must also cause you to reflect on the bigger picture of the profession. Has it changed your view of the role of accountants, of what they bring to the table?
I don't think it's changed my view, but I think it's widened that perception. As you go through your career, you gradually get a bigger picture view compared to when you start out and you just have this very narrow view as to what being an accountant is. And I know, we have a reputation of being, dare I say it, bean counters. I'll say it really quietly. But we're not bean counters, or rather we're a lot more than bean counters. And I think the year as president, I met so many people in many different countries through the world who are accountants and who bring so much to the world of business and to their local societies, their local communities, that we are very much more than bean counters.
I guess I'm sure that's true, and I'm glad to hear you say it. I do think part of our credibility sits on the assumption that we have counted the beans correctly.
Yes, I mean, there are some basic things, aren't there? If you're hiring an accountant to do your tax, to do your accounts, to do your audit, or the myriad other things that accountants might do, you've got to get that work right. So technically, you have to be good. You can't just sort of, I'll just wing it a bit. The whole point of hiring a professional accountant is to do the work correctly. But of course, there's so much more that an accountant can offer. And I think increasingly in this age when technology is taking quite a lot of the basic tasks, the adding up, the even filing returns or filing accounts, the software can do so much more than it used to be able to do, that the accountant needs to sort of bring their skills up to a higher level. And I've seen a lot of that. We're working with lots of accountants over the years. You can be a leader. You can really help the business that either you work within, or if you're working in a firm and you've got clients, you can really help the businesses to grow and to make the best of whatever concept that business has.
You mentioned the understanding that accountants develop of how businesses run, and I understand the rhetoric around that point, and it's one that's been being made. I'm not saying it's not an original point, but the professional bodies have been talking about accountants and their insight into business since I first engaged with the profession 30 years ago. And yet I still come across accountants who, if you were to ask them what KPIs one of their clients should count, they wouldn't be able to answer the question. Do you think it's changing? Do you think accountants are getting better at that? Or is it just that there's a great role for them to take up should they choose to?
I think it's a bit of both. I think one of the things that the increasing availability and abilities of technology, what that's meaning is that if accountants are in that sort of little, blinkered view of, I just do this bit and I don't think about that wider issue as to, as you say, what KPIs might work for this business, what might they need to think about. I think the accountant will rapidly find themselves out of work because the technology will take the basic level of stuff, for want of a better phrase. And I know the basic level is not necessarily that basic, but we've got some really good technology. And the people, the accountants who really want to be successful, sometimes we call them the trusted advisors, whether internally or externally, they need to be able to bring something else. So they need to see the wider picture. And one of the things that quite a lot of accountants get at least some point in their career is experience of how different businesses run. And bringing that experience to bear on their current role should allow them to think, well, actually, yeah, do you know, you could do this better, or you could look at that, or actually, I think these are things that, you know, are important. And things like, you know, wider issues, sustainability, diversity, what we might have regarded as soft things are not really so soft, because they really could mean the difference between success or failure, or really good success and, you know, just muddling along for a business. I
guess one of the things we sometimes forget is that as professionals, not just accountants, but all sorts of professionals, you are, particularly if you're working in a practice, you are engaging with all sorts of different clients all the time. And although there are issues of confidentiality, there are also lots of opportunities for taking something you learnt in one place and helping an organisation that's in no way competitive with the previous one, with a problem they have that you've seen solved somewhere else. And accountants do that naturally and probably don't think that that's their great contribution.
Yeah, and I think sometimes that does feed back even to issues of pricing and things, that accountants choose, you know, how to price things, and they think, oh, it only took me a moment to, you know, to say that, or a few moments or whatever. It's like, what, a moment and a lifetime of experience. Yeah. You know, don't do yourself down. Think about the value of what you really know, what you really understand, what you can convey to clients. As you say, where you can avoid those, you know, confidentiality issues or competitive issues, because clearly you don't want to breach any of your ethical guidelines and not do things above board. But all of that experience, quite often, there is no conflict to anybody else. It's just about good management. It's just about running your business better. And you can convey that information to your clients, to your internal, we often even call them clients or customers internally in organisations these days, and help them to do things better.
I think I agree with that completely, and the more that we can do that, the more value we must add. That makes an awful lot of sense to me. Along the way there, perhaps by mistake, you mentioned the dreaded word ethics.
I did.
Professional bodies knock on about ethics quite a lot.
Do they really?
How central is that to the role?
It is absolutely core, because by becoming a professional accountant, wherever you are in the world really, ICAEW, the International Ethics Standard Board for Professional Accountants, sort of sets out rules, and then your individual professional body, whichever that might be, says, okay, this is the version of it, and they're more or less the same as, you know, just some slight tweaks in different jurisdictions. And that is all really about what a professional is being about. It's not that you're just somebody who has a technical ability, which is important, really important, don't get me wrong, but it's somebody who has a technical ability, but knows that there are limits. That if you look at the ethical fundamental principles, you know, integrity, you know, you have integrity, objectivity. So when you're coming to a conclusion, when you're giving advice, you are objective in giving that advice. You take due care with doing your work, and you do your work with professional competence. You keep information confidential, and you act with, shall we say, professional courtesy. You are nice to work with. You are polite. And people might look at these and say, well, they seem very old-fashioned values. Do they really count in today's environment? But what makes us different quite often as professional accountants, rather than just somebody who says, oh, yeah, I'll set up as an accountant but with no professional qualification, is not just the technical knowledge, but our ability to put it into that framework of an ethical way of doing business.
I certainly found that when I've operated in larger corporate environments, I found that extremely valuable. In one particular place I remember working, I was surrounded by people who took various places on the spectrum in terms of how far they were prepared to push the rules. And I was trying to chart a course that enabled me to look like I cared about results, but wasn't bending the rules as much as the people that I thought were going too far. And I found the CFO in the business I was running to be an enormously valuable colleague and partner, because I trusted him to have the right antenna. Yeah. And where he was comfortable with something, I thought, well, that must be okay then. Now, I wasn't washing my hands of responsibility, but I did think, look, I'm going to have to push my luck a bit here, and I need to know that you'll tell me when I've gone too far.
Yeah. And I think that is often the role, both internally and externally, that the accountant is looked at to be somebody who will say no. And people moan, again, both internally and externally, that, oh, the accountant told me I couldn't do it. Oh, and there is that element of frustration. But the other side of it is actually the accountant is maybe keeping them out of trouble at the extreme end, or maybe helping them to chart a better course, a better way of doing things, rather than, the easy way might be a bit of a shortcut, but it might have some disastrous consequences later on. And if you've got a good leadership role as an accountant, then you're the person who people can rely on to say no when no needs to be the answer, or to say, well, not quite, and just sort of push you back on course. I think it's very important.
I opened the newspaper this morning to see the trial of Mike Lynch, the former CEO and founder of Autonomy, was starting today. And it did make me think, the next time I hear somebody complaining about a revenue recognition conversation between the sales director and the accountant, it's a pretty good case study to mention.
Yeah, I mean, there are, and because I'm a geeky accountant, I do tend to read some of the detailed things that come out of regulators, particularly on cases that have gone wrong, if you like. And yes, you've got deeply technical arguments and all sorts of things like that. But fundamentally, you've got honesty and dishonesty at the heart of it sometimes.
Absolutely. I guess the flip side of the accountant that has to say no sometimes because of ethics is that when they don't say no, they add confidence.
Yeah.
And I like the fact that particularly since we've started talking about sustainability and we can't call work the firms do on that audit, so the word assurance has become more and more widely used. I really like the word assurance because it is what accountants add to the numbers.
It is, and that role, whether it's internally, externally, whether it's a formal audit, which is a type of assurance, or whether, as you say, it's sustainability assurance, it gives people confidence in the information that they're being presented with. I mean, we've got all sorts of issues with greenwashing still. We haven't got a mature framework for providing assurance on green issues, if you like, sustainability issues, in the same way we have for financial statements. And people moan about audit. They moan, dare I say it, they moan about having to have an audit where they are, compelled to have an audit. But the reality is, if you look at countries that have audit as a developed product which works really well, which helps assure people that the information that they're looking at is right within the bounds of, we're not talking to the penny or anything, but we know what we mean. They're true and fair is the word that we use for audit. But where you've got those frameworks, if you compare those economies and how successful those economies are with what happens in other jurisdictions where they've got lots of corruption, where they haven't got a mature audit framework, those economies are not nearly as successful because we are so far down the line of having had audit build up over many, many years. We forget actually how important it is to be sure of the data that we're seeing, the information that we're seeing. And I think sustainability is starting to bring this back home because all of a sudden we now have an immature framework for giving us assurance on sustainability. So people are like, yeah, but is that right? Are you telling us the truth? Can we believe you? And very, very quickly, we are starting to develop standards on assurance for sustainability so that we can develop the same level of faith and trust in those as we can in the financial statements. It's not to say that things don't occasionally go wrong, obviously they do, but in the vast majority of cases, what we get is a really effective economy.
And I think the point about the fact that other people in business value, although they may not articulate it in this way, enormously value the sign-off that accountants give, but moan like hell about getting it from them.
Yeah.
And I know that even with my knowledge of the profession, last year I moaned like mad about our audit. And then when we got the thing signed off at the end with no changes to our numbers, I was really delighted. I thought, that's quite a compliment. Now, I must have actually respected the process to be delighted. Otherwise, I would have thought it was pointless. But I still moaned while it was happening.
And I think, I'm not sure that any auditor has ever gone in and not had some level of moaning from the client about something. It's an inconvenience, it's an imposition. You have to stop your day job, if you like, and provide information to the auditors, answer their questions. It's a process, but it's a process there for a reason. And the same will happen as we get sustainability assurance, coming in. We've got some sustainability assurance already in place. And yes, it's a pain, but it's the value at the other end. And I think sometimes, even if for the individual or the individual company, they can't quite see the benefit of the audit and they think it's all a bit pointless. It is also about the wider macro environment and the economy working well and people broadly trusting the information that they see and therefore being able to make decisions on that information with confidence.
That very neatly sums up that value, I think. But it also brings me on to the next question that I wanted to ask you, which was about the various ways in which accountants provide leadership. I wondered if you could share any thoughts about that. I'm thinking about a whole variety of different ways in which that might happen, knowingly or unknowingly.
Yeah, leadership is an interesting point because a lot of accountants will know, almost all accountants will know, that actually from a very junior stage in your career, you're probably given an element of a leadership role. So, your first year, let's say a lot of accountants train in practice in audit. Not all of them, but a lot of them do. So you start off and yes, you're being told, do this, do that, do something else. But even on your individual piece of work, you're expected to take responsibility for it, to present it when it's completed and so on. But by your second year, you're probably in charge of the first year. You're expected to lead them, to coach them, to tell them what it is that they're supposed to be doing, to explain, to deal with any issues that they might have. So even though it's a sort of a mini leadership role, because it might only be one other person, maybe two, something of that nature, nonetheless, right from that very early stage in your career, you're expected to lead. And by just a couple of years after you've started, you might be running a whole audit. And all of a sudden, you are the technical expert. You're talking to the client. You're asking the awkward questions, which are annoying the client, because you're that expert in that area. And hopefully, at least, you've been given the training, the mentoring to allow you to be that confident leader, albeit still in a narrow sense.
I like your example of the second year person who's providing leadership to the first year person. And I think not only do they do that by directing them and understanding, just knowing the ropes better than the first year person, but they also do it through the behaviours that they model. Yeah. And I think that as finance professionals, we do that much more than we realise. If you're working in a business and you are put in charge of, or you're asked to conduct a budgeting process, you can decide whether, and you know that the entire company thinks it's a bureaucratic waste of time and that you all know what you're going to end up with 6% more than you had last year in all the budgets, or whatever it might be that the cynicism is in that organisation. If you subscribe to that and say, oh, I know this is all a waste of time, but we've got to fill these forms in, you undermine the process. When if you play it with a straight bat, you actually provide leadership in saying, no, this is worth doing. So the way that you behave, I think, as a professional, it is enormously important in providing leadership.
Absolutely, and behaviour, I think, has become a lot more in the spotlight over the last few years. We've seen some really sad examples of really poor behaviour. If you take the CBI and the debacle that we had, if you can call it that, it almost seems too minor a word for what went on, but where a culture, and we're straying into the area of culture here, but the culture of the organisation was one which allowed people to behave really badly. In that case, primarily it seemed to be towards women. So, oh no, we don't really like women, they're in the minority. We can bully, we can harass, we can sexually harass. And of course there were allegations right up to rape. And you're thinking, hang on a minute, how does an organisation have a culture in which, in a sort of a wider work context, that somehow it's like okay for this sort of behaviour to go on? And if you take that back to sort of leadership roles and how that influences, the behaviour of anybody, whether an accountant or whatever, particularly as you get more senior, has an impact on how the whole organisation works. And we've seen perhaps more expectation of people being treated more fairly. We don't want to be bullied, we don't want to be harassed, we don't want to be, pointed finger at us as if we're at school, if you like. We want to be treated in a respectful manner. And I think accountants and the underlying ethics that we have does at least set us up to say, okay, we are supposed to be behaving professionally, being courteous, and that links in to creating an organisational environment where we do take account of what everybody else, needs, how we might communicate effectively with other people, and creating an environment which is nice for people to work in. Now, I'm not saying accountants get this perfectly at all. We are all vulnerable to the same difficulties. We all go into an organisation and probably mostly morph into that culture rather than give it our own culture. But of course, the difference is leaders can change a culture, can show that there's another way to do it, as you say, by saying, well, no, let's take this process seriously. Let's do this. Let's think about that. And helping to drive that new set of behaviours forward.
That's a really valuable point. I think you've mentioned, or perhaps strayed onto the area of deliberately onto the area of sexual equality and treatment of women in the workplace. I noticed that before you were president of ICAEW, 140 something other people did the job, and you were the fourth one that was a woman, which that, when you put it like that, sounds pretty awful. Although 3 of the last 8 incumbents have been women. Is that representative of the fact that things are dramatically changing?
Things are definitely changing, and I mean, getting that change is really important, I think. And almost by the end of the year, and now, as you say, with some time to reflect, I think I've recognised that it's even more important than I thought at the beginning. So at the beginning, I felt that I could add value. I felt that I could be a force for good. I'm not sure I was especially focusing on me as a female doing that role. It's just like, as an individual, I felt I could be of value. With the benefit of hindsight, quite a lot of young women, and not necessarily accountants from all different sort of backgrounds, came up to me and said, oh, wow, it's really good to see you as a woman doing this role. We didn't think that, women could really do roles like this. Sometimes they'd add that second bit about we didn't really think, and sometimes they wouldn't. But I was amazed by how many young women said, oh, wow, this is...
Makes you realise it's quite a responsibility.
Yeah, and we're not used to seeing this. And it does, as you say, there's been a lot of progress. So, really moving in the right direction. But nonetheless, you do still find challenges in lots of organisations and individuals and their attitude towards women. Or, and of course, it's, if we bring in the wider question of diversity and inclusion, it's not just about gender, it's about all sorts of other aspects of diversity. And really, we should take each person for themselves and their skills and try and provide an environment in which they all can give of their best. And I think that's where we would want to go. And gender diversity is one part of that. And in the financial sector, it is a particularly big part because there is some quite poor gender balance in some areas.
Absolutely. And some of that, I think, is to do with the finance profession, and some of it is more structurally problematic in terms of the background educational qualifications that people are coming out of lower level educational establishments with, that there's an imbalance in terms of just, how many girls take maths A level. Not that you need a maths A level to do an accountancy qualification, but
just as well.
Yeah, but it's difficult for the profession. But I think sometimes we've hidden behind that a little and found it easier to hire people in our own image.
It's almost always easier to hire people in our own image because it's easier to understand somebody who looks like us, thinks like us, went to the same sort of school as us, and it makes us more comfortable. Comfort is nice, but when you're watching telly in the evening, comfort is nice. If you want comfort all during your day at work, then you're probably not really making the most of that organisation, the potential there for doing better. And I think trying to, push those boundaries and say, well, hang on a minute, what am I missing by being comfortable? What am I missing by just hiring in my own likeness, for instance? You might be missing fantastic talent, but from a different socioeconomic background, and they communicate in a different way, or they need help with money to get to the interview, or they haven't even got a computer to do your basic online tests before you can apply, for an interview stage. And you're like, gosh, I hadn't ever thought of that. Surely everybody has a computer at home. No, not everybody has a computer at home. Oh, what do we do about it? Because there could be fantastic talent And I know a lot of accountants will have experienced a lot of shortages in talent over recent years. So why are we fishing in that same narrow pool of people like me when lots of other people have, abilities who could really make a difference? And of course, if you get those different perspectives in, clients have different perspectives as well. So it helps your client, which helps your business, which helps you go out and employ more diverse sets of people.
I think that's a really important point that people too often miss. Not because if you say it, they would disagree, but because it just doesn't really occur that we notice the difference between somebody who is different to the group of people that we work with. But more than we notice the difference between us and the people we work for, who presumably, the idea that actually lots of these clients might have thought, oh, here they come. It's this type of person that works for the accountants. We've taken that for granted over the years. And so having a more diverse range of people that you can send on projects and could be enormously valuable to a practice.
Absolutely. And you do sometimes now have clients who are getting stronger about that whole thing and saying, I've actually heard that where a pitch team has gone in for, say, an audit or some other big piece of work, and the pitch team has been entirely men, let's say, for the sake of argument, because that was the example, and the client or the potential client said, I'm not going to employ them. They can't come up with a single woman on their pitch team. What sort of organisation is that? I don't want that sort of polluting our type of culture, which is much more diverse. And they just, cross it off the list. No more questions. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. And people who are putting pitch teams together might think, wow, that's a bit harsh, just because of that one tiny thing. But you've got to understand your client. You've got to think about what are they going to expect to see. If diversity is important to them, and increasingly it's important to lots and lots of organisations, then you've got to provide something that to them looks acceptable, looks like it's going to work for you, for them as clients.
We're talking more broadly, I guess, about culture and about the culture of our organisations and how that marries with the culture of the organisations we work with or for. What's the accountant's role in terms of shaping culture?
I think the accountants can have a really important role in shaping culture. One of the factors is, as we've said earlier, that you see lots of different businesses quite often, or at least different departments within, if you're in a corporate role, different departments. Quite often, different departments have quite different cultures. IT department or marketing department or sales, they're not the same. They don't feel the same, they don't look the same, they don't act the same typically. So the accountant has a linking role. And the accountant can, as we said before, fundamental ethics are important. So they can think about, what are the basics that we might expect in an organisation in terms of how we treat people. But I think there's been quite a lot of change. The pandemic changed quite a lot of the ways that we did things, quite a lot of the expectations that people had. But even before that, new generations always come through, don't they? New generations think different things to existing generations. And some of those things are pointing us towards a different type of culture. On the negative side, what we're reading about quite a lot is a lot of poor mental health, really high percentages of poor mental health. A lot of people not even in work. And there was a report just the other day from the government departments about the benefits being claimed by people who are long-term sick because of mental health issues. But then even within companies, most businesses will know that there's a rising number of people who might be off sick, either for a short period or a longer period, or nonetheless, they're into work, but they have some mental health issues. Or perhaps it's not mental health, but it's neurodiverse issues where they need some extra support. In the past, we might have had a very much, well, no, we're going to do things like this. You need to fit in with us.
And if they couldn't do that, when I was young, it was just that so-and-so couldn't hack it.
Yeah.
And that was definitely how people reacted to
Absolutely.
that situation.
And you would never have admitted to any mental health weakness because you think, oh gosh, I'll never get a job again if I
They
admit
might
to
be
it.
nice, they might help me, but I'll wave goodbye to any progression, would be what I'd have thought at the time.
Very much. And I think that was very entrenched as a view. And I think that is being well and truly dug up. And now maybe the foot is on the other boot, because people coming into workplaces, and not just young people, you know, we've seen a lot of 50 pluses leave the workplace because it's like, well, they saw a little bit of their own mortality in COVID with all those death certificates and statistics being put up in the news, that all of a sudden you think, oh, well, do I want to do this for 60 hours a week or however many hours a week it was? Or actually, do I think there's more to life? So if organisations want to have effective, productive, happy workforces, because let's face it, happy people are almost always more productive than unhappy people, we've got to address that. So culture becomes much more than some airy-fairy, well, oh yeah, somebody talks about culture, but it's not really relevant to me or my organisation. It becomes really important. And accountants, as often a linchpin in an organisation or a linchpin advisor for an organisation, can help to sort of try and encourage companies to think about their culture, to think about the costs of a poor culture in which people leave very often or don't turn up for work because they are just so miserable that they cannot get out of bed that morning. And so I think, you know, there's a role for all leaders, but also even for those that aren't leaders, even in speaking up, even in saying, I think we need a nicer environment, a more understanding, a more supportive environment, whatever it is, to change that culture where it's necessary to change it, because some places have a lovely culture already, where it's necessary, to look at that, not as some, dare I say it, people will go on about namby-pamby or, you know, snowflake generation. It's not about that. It's about productivity. It's about making businesses more successful because people really want to go into work on a Monday morning. So that's what it's all about, creating cultures where people are really positive about their organisations. And I think accountants can really help on that.
I have to say, I hear people towards the end of their normal working lifespan, railing about the younger generation and different attitudes towards work. And there's part of me that thinks it's just a massive generalisation. But there's another part of me that just remembers when I was young and a whole bunch of, you know, ex-national service people who'd come out of the army and thought the young people all had long hair and were useless layabouts. I mean, it's just always, it's just the same thing. The generations don't always understand each other. That's not a new issue, is it? It's
not a new issue. And I think, yeah, if the generations started to really understand each other, we'd probably think something had gone very, very awry, because almost every generation has to have something which is a little bit different, because they're almost, you know, it's the classic child against parent. Yeah, you have to split away and you have to think, well, no. You know, look at fashion. If older people are wearing it, then younger people don't want to wear it, or vice versa. And then, of course, the older people want to look younger and more trendy, so they try and adopt the things which the younger people. And in culture, in ways of doing things, there are clear differences. Of course, the problems that we've got in terms of getting a culture which works for everybody is everybody's different. So ideally, what we develop are cultures that work for diverse ranges of people, which make people feel included, whether what they like to be is really social or whether mostly they like to shut themselves away, work really, really hard quietly on a project and have the minimum amount of contact with everybody else. And usually there's space for all of those people because different tasks demand different sort of things. So trying to create something where everybody can play to their strengths makes an organisation just so much better, but it also makes life happier and more enjoyable for the individuals working there. And then they might stay, they might encourage their friends to come, and you stop having quite the same existential issues with getting staff or keeping staff, or the costliness of constantly changing staff. I think it's a really nice way of talking about inclusivity, because I think sometimes we talk about inclusivity in terms of various initiatives. We're going to look at ethnicity, we're going to look at gender, we're going to look at age.
or we're going to look at neurodiversity, as though they're all separate issues. Well, they are separate issues. But in fact, just thinking of everybody as different and how can we continually add to the theoretical list of ways in which people are all different and we might want to involve them and get the best out of them. Maybe we could address all of those issues at the same time rather than doing it through separate drives.
Yeah, and in a sense, I mean, I understand.
Maybe that's too simplistic. Right?
I know, but I understand what you mean, because in a sense, you concentrate on, gender diversity, ethnic diversity, and you have all these boxes, if you like, to tick or to not tick, depending on what you're trying to do. And that you're still pigeonholing people, aren't you? Just because somebody's from a particular ethnic diversity, let's say, doesn't mean that they also haven't got a neurodiversity or a physical disability.
Or that one person's extrovert and another person's introvert.
I mean, these are all, in the formal language, they talk about intersectionalities. There's all sorts of intersectionalities between all sorts of different characteristics. And if we treated people as individuals and thought and talked to them and said, okay, well, what will work for you as well as what works for me as an organisation, we should get so much more. And this isn't the way that we've done things. If we go back to the Industrial Revolution, we had very much bringing people in from the agricultural fields, so to speak, sticking them in a factory, saying, you stand there or sit there or whatever, and you do this all day, and you do it for hours and hours, and you do it 7 days a week or whatever it was. And it was very rigid, and you will do this. Now, I sincerely hope that we've come quite a long way from that. We've got different sorts of lives, we've got different sorts of expectations. We've got very different futures with some of the impacts of AI and things that we're seeing, where a lot of the work, a bit like the introduction of machinery, all of a sudden work that took 20 men took one man, and it was a man, but quite often. And now we've got the same sort of thing happening. So we need to be more imaginative. Now, we have the advantage. We've got these brain things. They're hugely powerful, hugely imaginative. And for instance, on number of hours that people work, I remember, my kids are all grown up now, but they were little. And I was trying to still pursue a professional career. Fortunately, I had employers, well, probably partly because I chose employers, who understood that, okay, you want a professional career, you're a professional person, but I worked part-time for a lot of years. Now, I was a manager in an accountancy firm, providing training and whatever. And we worked out, okay, well, normally we expect full-time managers to do some overtime for free. Everybody will be familiar with this, overtime for free. We expect you to do overtime for free. And I'm like, I only want to work 3 days. However, if you start talking about overtime, my overtime could then all of a sudden be 2 whole extra days and, I'll be working full time. How you make sure that this works for both of us? So we came up with a solution where, okay, well, the normal hours for a full-time person working overtime, we'd expect, however many 100 hours. So we'll prorate that. And then after that, if you've still done more hours, we'll pay you for them. Now, that was quite a lot of years ago. I've worked hybridly for my entire career, which has helped enormously with my caring responsibilities with children, and it's helped enormously with me enjoying my job and progressing and moving forward with my career. But if companies now, instead of expecting all their junior staff to come in, work 60-hour weeks, if that's what they expected, if some of their stuff, and it's not actually just junior, I don't know why I just say junior, because it could be the senior ones as well. If what they want is, well, actually, I can only really work 3 days because I've got elderly parents I need to care for, or I can only do this, or I've got a health issue. Let's just work something out. With technology, it's not like it's really difficult to work out part-time, this, that, the other. We just need to be more imaginative about how we make it work. And where they've got client contact, how we make it work with clients, because it can be done.
And I guess we have to have quite grown-up conversations about how we make it work for both sides. That
because
you're going to do this, not that. We've got to reward you in an appropriate way, and we've got to have conversations about. Sometimes you're exploring that for the first time, so it feels a bit like you're making it up, which is uncomfortable for people when they're in management roles because they like there to be structures and grades, and
rules are nice.
You can hide behind that. Kind of accountants, of course, obviously like rules. But having those open conversations about how can we try and apply the principles over here to this situation that you're talking about, I think is part of the secret of getting through those things.
And I think there are lots of aspects to helping people to feel included and ensuring that you have diverse workforces. And there's tons of evidence that diverse workforces get you more innovation, more profits, better success basically in business. And so if you're going to do that, being able to have grown-up proper conversations, and this is one area where the accountant's sort of soft skills really come in, or anybody's soft skills really come in, but the accountant's often in a really leading position in the organisation to be able to drive those conversations and to find the solutions, because often there will be money involved.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because it was something before we finished, something I wanted to talk about. Quite a lot of the things we've been discussing involve a level of empathy and sensitivity that people don't always naturally associate with the finance profession. How do we make sure that we develop strengths in those areas alongside our technical expertise?
Well, we've got to not neglect those areas. And there is a tendency for accountants, as you say, to be very focused, both accountants themselves and the external perception. Sadly, lots of people will still not have forgotten the Monty Python sketch. Look it up if you haven't seen it, about the accountant. But in reality, if we're going to have future careers, we've got to be able to do more than the software. If the software starts to be able to do the tax computations, the accounts, some of the audit at least, and so on and so forth, we've got to be able to offer something more. So what is it from a emotional intelligence point of view that you can bring, that you need to develop? So maybe you're really social, you feel really happy dealing with people, so you think, oh, well, that's fine. But it's not just about being happy dealing with people, it's about having difficult conversations with people. Being happy going to a nice jolly networking, you might be fine. Sitting down making somebody redundant or doing a performance appraisal which is very negative, you might think...
In fact, so if you're somebody who is very good at getting on with people, that actually might make it more difficult for you to do those things, because you understand quite how difficult what you're going to tell that person is going to be for them.
Yeah, because empathy, kicks both ways. On the one hand, you understand people, so you can more likely get on with them. On the other hand, you understand the pain that things will cause. And so don't neglect things like difficult conversations. So many people, if they haven't dealt with that properly, perhaps because they never had a boss who had good skills in that way, but if you've got a member of staff, they're not performing very well. If you don't tell them, how are they supposed to get better? How are they supposed to address it? You are doing them a really big disservice. And so, really, we all have a responsibility to make sure that we can communicate difficult messages as well as nice messages, and we can communicate it sensitively, and that we can be polite. We can argue and disagree. It's important to argue and disagree, like we talked earlier. An accountant should push back where necessary, but we don't want to put people's backs up. We want to push back in a respectful way, pointing out why that is, what it is, why we need to push back on it. So develop your skills, work out where you're strong, where you're weak. There's lots of online tools that can help you do that. And then look at the training that you need. What do you need to be reminded of? What do you need a refresher? It might be as simple as, gosh, I'm not very organised with my working time. I get in a muddle. How do I better organise my time? Or it might be, how do I have these difficult conversations?
Difficult conversations is an area I've spent quite a lot of time thinking about. And I think it's something that accountants, it frustrates me that they struggle with it, because accountants are good at doing their homework and preparing for things. But when they're faced with a difficult conversation, a soft skills situation that they find difficult, they tend to panic. And I always say, why don't you pour your energies into planning how you might have the conversation, not into waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning and fretting about it? You know, how are we going to open up a conversation about this? How am I going to talk to this person about it? What words will I use? Are they inflammatory? You know, all of those things. And anyway, this isn't a session on how to do those things, but I really only tried to make the point, put the same effort into planning those things as you do into the technical side of the job, and you'll find it a lot easier.
And I think for some reason, as you say, accountants sometimes miss that planning applies to everything. And I mean, I see it as a professional speaker, I always prepare for, you know, what it is that I'm going to speak about. I don't just turn up, you know, there's always preparation behind it. And then you'll have people turn up and say, oh, I don't quite know how this technology works. Do I press this button in front of the audience? And you're like, why didn't you come and check that earlier? But on difficult conversations or any of the other sort of other leadership and emotional intelligence types of things, the soft skills areas, you can prepare just the same. You can work out how am I going to approach it. You can write down the key points. You can work out and hopefully help to avoid, you know, the real mistakes where you really wind them up by saying something flippant, perhaps, which you don't mean like that. And then all of a sudden it's out of your mouth. Planning is, as you say, key.
Going back to your presentations example, I'm sure you will have had this experience of people coming up to you and saying, you're so good at this. And you think, well, thank you, that's very nice. But it doesn't just happen.
No, it doesn't just happen. And I think there's a tendency for people to think, when it comes to soft skills, people sort of think, oh, well, you've either got it or you haven't. You know, when it's technical skills, they quite understand that they'll need to go on a course to learn the new IFRS 15 or whatever, you know, when it came out. But if it's soft skills, well, you know, you've either got that or not. It's not true. The brain is very elastic. It can learn all of the time, and we can really develop our ability in all of those soft skill areas as well. Very, very important. Don't neglect it. Otherwise, you just become a computer. And if you're becoming a computer, you'll have computers that are cheaper than you.
That's a very good place to draw this to a close, I think, because the point that you're making applies to so much of what we've been talking about and would enhance your ability to deal with all of those situations. But we could carry on talking all day, but we should stop because we're running out of time. So I should say thank you very much, Julia Penny. It's been an absolute pleasure and as always, insightful and interesting. And I should say thank you for watching. I've been in conversation with Julia Penny.